How do you actually get a story out of your head and into a video on YouTube? There are lots of ways to do that, but it's easy to get confused and frustrated in the process. Today, I'm going to be talking about 5 levels of storytelling on YouTube and when to use them and some tactics that anyone can use to raise their storytelling skills at any level. Welcome to the Story Greenlight podcast, where we're all about empowering creators like you to tell your stories, connect with your audience, and create the impact that you were put on this planet to make. My name is Jeff Bartsch. I'm a coach, author, and entrepreneur with over 20 years of experience shaping content for ABC, NBC, Universal, Disney, Apple, and a whole bunch of others. My team and I support YouTube creators with followings in the hundreds to the many millions. At Story Greenlight, we believe that you matter, your message matters, and the world needs to hear what you have to say. Confession time. There was a time when I thought that there was only one way to tell a story, and that was the Hollywood way. Now, in my defense, this was in the early 2000s, and YouTube did not exist yet, and it was what I knew, and it was me in my early 20s. I was just getting started in my career in Los Angeles, editing broadcast TV, and I was going out to the movies constantly. Ask my wife how often I went out to eat, and she will roll her eyes because I went out to eat constantly in my single days. And a lot of the times I would just go out to eat. One of my favorite places to go was the ArcLight in Hollywood, California, the ArcLight Theater, amazing theater. And I would have dinner there and then I'd just go see a movie. And I would do that over and over and over. And I dreamed of making these movies myself, and I was talking to people who were making them. And in the meantime, I got paid great money to tell stories Hollywood style in Hollywood through traditional broadcast media in television. And so it's easy in that context to think that, everyone that I know, all the young people my age, they're coming to Hollywood. They're dreaming of making it in the industry. I'm already there. I'm doing it. Everyone wants to be here. So everyone wants to be in Hollywood, right? Well, off I went thinking that, everyone wants to do storytelling like traditional TV and film. And I said, I'm going to start online business stuff, teaching people what I have learned in Hollywood, because everyone wants to be me and do what I'm doing, and they want to be here in Hollywood. And turns out that's just not true. Took me a while to figure that out. And but in the process of figuring that out, I was walking through the world being a hammer. And when you're a hammer, pretty much everything looks like a nail. And you think that, well, hey, everyone wants to do this, the thing that I know. And the biggest, most important thing about storytelling is obviously through editing, because you can shoot whatever you want, but you can just repurpose everything when you do the editing. And, that's what I know all about. So eventually, I started realizing that some people dream of Hollywood fame and stardom, and some people want to actually do that, but a lot more people don't. And especially these days, when everyone has access to their own gear, especially stuff like this kind of a phone that's just living in your pocket and that kind of thing. And storytelling is its own thing. It's not, it is the force behind Hollywood. I mean, some people will say that money is the force behind Hollywood. And the fact of the matter is, if storytelling didn't work to make Hollywood projects work, the money wouldn't be there. So I say that storytelling is the force behind Hollywood. But storytelling exists outside of Hollywood in lots of different forms. And it is equally powerful in its own way in different places, especially on YouTube. And I bumped along my own path for quite a while, figuring this out, figuring out what was important and when it was important and why. Especially when the more I was learning about YouTube and I saw, well, there are people using storytelling this way, but they're using that, and people are doing all kinds of different ways that were not at all like what I had been doing in my broadcast career. And yet they were still gathering these huge audiences and all this stuff. So I just sat there scratching my head. Took a while to figure that stuff out. So what I realized was, number one, storytelling is a big deal. Because, I'd always known that, but, and that remains true to this day. Storytelling is this really, really big deal. It's this fundamental way that human beings connect with another human being. So yes, it is a big deal. Number two, storytelling works in a lot of different ways, especially on YouTube. And this is what I have learned along the way in terms of how it actually works and how to make it less confusing for people who are wanting to say, okay, well, I have a story to tell, but how do I actually do it? And do I have to do it like all this crazy fancy stuff? And the answer is no. Sometimes the fancy approach is worth it and it can leave an amazing impression. Sometimes the people remember for years and years, but a lot of the time it's just not necessary. So what we have here is what I call the 5 levels of storytelling on YouTube. Now, before I get into what they are, I want to just give a disclaimer here. It's partially a little clickbaity because, I'm thinking, okay, well, if I call it 5 levels of storytelling, people are going to say, oh, well, I want to be on the higher level, and oh, well, what level am I? And blah, blah, blah. Well, this is not, so I realize that some people might have been thinking that coming into here, but what I want to be clear, this is not about just getting up to higher levels. Not all the levels apply to all creators. This is not about the higher the better. And some might seem attractive or sexy, but sometimes the higher level stuff isn't actually worth your time at all. So I'm just using this term, the 5 levels, as a way to just wrap our head around these ideas. Storytelling level number 1. It's the easiest to do tech-wise. No fancy editing. What it is, it's a person talking to a camera. That's it. A talking head, as we call it in the entertainment industry. Talking head content. Anyone can do it. You just hold up a camera, or you put a camera on a stand or on a tripod, you hit record or go live or whatever, and you talk. Now, it is the easiest version of all of them to do because it requires the least post-production, the least editing. I mean, if you want to trim off the head and the tail so you get rid of the fumbling stuff at the beginning and get rid of the other stuff at the end, fantastic. That is probably all the editing that you would need to do with the solo talking head stuff, unless you want to do some extra trims and pull up sections and reorder some things in the middle. That's up to you. Here's the thing. It is easy to do. It is also hard to keep people's attention if you're doing anything beyond short form content. So this is not just applying to solo talking head. This applies to any kind of storytelling that's longer than short form. Most of us here at Story Greenlight are very familiar with what I call the master story framework, where it talks about a story being about where a character wants something, overcomes conflict to get it, and experiences transformation as a result. Now, that is the core of any story that has ever been told and ever will be told, at least from the Western world's point of view. The thing about this framework is that it expands and contracts. It can get super compressed down, so you can literally compress it down into a few words, and it can be expanded out like an accordion. It can be expanded out to epically long lengths. Anytime you take a short story and you expand it longer, it needs more moving parts in order for the story itself to work. And when you're telling a story in video form on YouTube or anywhere else, but especially on YouTube, the longer form you make it, the more you have to work to keep people's attention. Most times people do this by adding picture to it. There is a potential exception to this. If you are doing content that is audio first, like a video podcast, it's becoming more and more popular these days for people who are doing podcasts like this right here, that are primarily driven by the ideas and the conversations on things. And there happens to be video with it. And sometimes you'll see in the episodes here, we add picture in, or I'm talking about something with a guest and we call out something visually. And so then it makes more sense to talk about showing the video. But if you are doing video podcast, there is a built-in expectation that people aren't going to be watching the video as closely as they might if they're saying, okay, I'm sitting down and I'm going to watch a 3-minute YouTube video or a 10-minute or a 12-minute YouTube video. So that's level 1, talking head, solo talking head, just the person talking to the camera. That's pretty much it. Minimal editing, easy, on you go. Caveat, the longer you go, the harder it is to keep people's attention. Level number 2, talking head with B-roll. Some people talk about B-roll as if it's this most amazing artistic thing ever invented. Since the invention of sliced bread, oh, I get great B-roll. Well, you know what? Let's just break down and let's demystify B-roll a little bit. The idea of B-roll goes back, depending on who you talk to, it might go back to the days of linear tape-to-tape video editing, but it actually goes farther back than that. It goes back to the days of physical film processing, where people were doing post-production on physical motion picture film, and when they were being prepped in the film labs, you would have the primary roll of content, which is known as the A roll, and then it would checkerboard back and forth with pieces of supporting material that sometimes were inserts or shot cutaways or close-ups or something like that. And they were literally prepared on a second physical roll of film that was being used by the film lab during the processing of these film prints. And it was known as the A roll and the B roll. It was literally different rolls of motion picture film. And what it's come to be known as is the idea of primary content, known as the A roll, and B roll being the supporting content. So in its simplest terms, that's what A roll and B roll means. So in our conversation here, if you start out with a solo talking head and you want to add some more visual support to it, add some B-roll, add visual supporting content. So it doesn't have to be anything crazy. It does not have to be epic cinematic scenes shot with custom mats and 120 frames per second slow-mo and swish pans. There are a lot of people who love to do that. That is not what B-roll has to be. That's showing visual sequencing. That's not just using B-roll. One could make the argument that in a visual sequence, the B-roll actually is the A-roll in terms of primary content. But we're getting down the rabbit hole and we don't need to go there all that much more here. So the level 2 of storytelling on YouTube is talking head with B-roll. And one of the best ways to do that is if you're talking about something, there's a concept called see and say. And it's exactly what it sounds like. If you're talking about something, show what you're talking about. If you're talking about the story where you are going out to walk your dog, show a picture of your dog. It's that simple. See and say. And that is a way to underscore what you're saying on camera, and you add images to support that. So, level 2, talking head with B-roll. Level 3, scene work with talking head or maybe voiceover. So this is where you start to get more variables, more moving parts coming in. When you have when you have a talking head talking about a story, it's one thing to be able to tell the story. It's another thing entirely to show the story happening, to show that unfolding in a scene. That is often far more compelling to be able to show instead of tell. One of the big things that we talk about in the entertainment industry, and especially with video and television, is show, not tell. If you only tell what's happening if you only tell what's happening, basically you have a radio show or you have a podcast. But if you can communicate things by what you show and what you hear, that takes your storytelling up to the next level. So if you have your story and you actually have video recordings of different parts of this, then that is a way that you can add more visual variety, and you can add more engagement. You can add more elements to that by actually showing the things happening. Now, the great thing about this, level 3, scene work with talking head, that means that you get to checkerboard back and forth. It doesn't have to be all talking head, and it doesn't have to be all things. It doesn't have to be all video, reality, content, verite, however you want to call it. It doesn't have to be either one or the other. It can switch back and forth. And because you can switch back and forth, that means you get to pick the best spots and you don't have to use the rest of it. That right there is huge. How many times have you shot video at a kid's birthday party, at your kid's birthday party, and 90% of the party was a typical party, boring as all get out if you had to watch it, and you have half an hour of footage, but there was that one moment, or there are those 3 moments, say the moment at the beginning where Grandma and Grandpa showed up and surprised the birthday kid, and he freaked out and just started crying because he was so happy. Grandma and Grandpa gave him a big hug, and off we go. And then there's the happy birthday moment in the middle, and then there's the one thing where the one birthday guest at the end of the time fell off the chair and everyone thought it was hilarious. Just whatever it was. An hour long of footage, but with 3 moments that were actually memorable. Scene work with talking head lets you take just those 3 moments, and it means that you don't have to subject your long-suffering audience to all that other boring stuff. For the love of God, please just keep things short. You do not have to show all of it. One of the things that will make this level of storytelling work better than you could ever imagine is to do this. Lead with scene work before you have the talking head content. Show things happening in a scene before you start commenting on it. Even if it's something as simple as showing an establishing shot, an opening shot with a title on it, saying where we are, what date it is, and you see things happening. And then after that, you can start in with your talking head and do that. But when you lead with scene work, that means that people are going to feel like they're being part of this scene. They're going to feel like it's more like a movie or that kind of a thing. So that's something that you can set yourself up for success right off the bat. Lead with scene work, then add the commentary. Level 4 of storytelling on YouTube, scene work breaking the fourth wall. Now, what is this? Scene work is having a scene, showing video clips of action actually taking place, of the story unfolding in front of you. You have it where someone on camera is breaking the fourth wall, talking directly to camera. It's not sitting down as a talking head kind of a scenario. It's usually on the fly, in the moment, on location. So this is where lots of vlogging takes place. You're showing what's happening and you're explaining what's happening in the process. So if you are committed to this level 4 of scene work, breaking the fourth wall, that breaking the fourth wall, being able to talk directly to the camera, directly to the audience, even though you're in the scene, you need to make sure that you're explaining what's happening and why. And you need to be asking people, hey, where are we? What's happening? What's about to happen? What do we think might happen? How do you feel about what just happened? That kind of thing. And that's where you can actually get people's reactions to get more information to cover gaps in your story that you may or may not have covered. This is where things get challenging. If you want to tell your story just with scene work, then you have to work a lot harder to make sure that you show the beginning and the middle and the end of all this stuff. And a lot of the time, that's easier said than done. Storytelling level number 5, scene work without breaking the fourth wall. Now, this is where things get really, really powerful. On the easy side, this is where short form content can really shine, because it means that you are showing a story unfolding without any person being on camera saying what's happening or cutting to someone with talking head content explaining things. This is much more like you are there and you're experiencing something almost like you're a fly on the wall. Now, this is easier to do if it's short form, but if you get anything longer than short videos, that's when things get really, really hard. You can't because if you're committed to scene work without breaking the fourth wall and having no one talking to the camera, then that's where you get into the world of traditional documentary or scripted television and film. You have to be very careful about how you explain what's happening in your story, where things are going, and you have to show all the pieces. You have to know who all the characters are, what they want, what's getting in their way, and you can't just show up on camera and saying blah, 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 blah. Well, here's what she was thinking. Here's what I was thinking. And this is what, it gets really tricky really easily. And so what people in the traditional media of film and television do, they use something called expositional dialogue. They say, here's dialogue that would probably never happen in real life, but we're putting it in here so people can understand what's happening. If by that explanation you think, okay, well, that sounds like that could end up being kind of dumb, you're right. It's really easy for expositional dialogue to feel really lame and stilted because it's not usually the kind of dialogue that would actually happen in real life. And as you and I know, we are all experts on knowing what feels real and what doesn't. So it is really, really hard for this level 5 storytelling, scene work without breaking the fourth wall. It's really hard to get that to work at all, even for the most accomplished professionals within the film and television world. And frankly, if you can make it happen back in the day in a 6-second Vine, which Vine got shut down, but then TikTok comes up and replaces it, and there's millions upon millions upon millions of videos who do this exact thing all the time in short form. If you can make that happen in short form, it is amazing. This is where cat videos live. This is where you can just be the fly on the wall and you can see the cat jumping up, trying to get on the ceiling fan, and then the cat gets stuck and the cat's swinging around on the ceiling fan and the cat's freaking out, and you hear someone off camera losing it because they're watching the cat, and the cat falls off, splats on the ground, and just is all pissed off and just stalks away angry. But, and that whole thing took place in 10 seconds. but it told the whole story. This is why viral videos often work so well, because they capture moments that communicate stories. But man, anything longer than short form, it gets hard to do well. So be careful. And most of the times, it's not really even a viable option for most YouTube content. And don't feel bad if you don't ever go there, because you don't have to. It's fine. Those are the 5 levels of storytelling on YouTube. In order to actually put some boots to the ground, got some applications, got some suggestions on how to actually make this work so you can pick the area that is best for you. Fact of the matter is, you don't see me right now doing lots of film style shooting and fancy editing and all that kind of stuff, because frankly, that's the kind of stuff that I do for my client work, and I love doing it. But for content on YouTube, the stuff that I'm trying to do, the stuff that I'm trying to accomplish, and the people that I'm trying to empower, the stuff that I found most powerful for the people in the Story Greenlight community is ideas. And ideas are often communicated best just with a talking head, just like what I'm doing right now. And when you put that together with the expectation of, okay, this is a longer form piece of content, and people say, okay, well, this is something that I want to learn about. So they are going to, your audience will probably be more likely to stick around for a longer stretch of time with talking head content that way. Now, to take things beyond that, start at the beginning, start with talking head, and then support your basic talking head content with see and say B-roll. So we talked a little bit earlier about what see and say is. It's whenever you're talking about something, show it at that same moment. You don't want it to be late, don't want it to be early. Otherwise, it just feels weird, because that's what we're used to in our content consumption. So support talking head with your see and say B-roll, show images and video that support what you're saying. And then once you get that, if you want to take things up to the next level, then experiment by adding in scene work. Now, if you're talking about a full form of it, think of it as a scene. If you are thinking of it in just little partial forms, think of it as a sound up. And that term comes from the world of broadcast news, where a lot of the time stories would be communicated by anchors, by news anchors sitting at a desk, being the talking head, and the people back in the control room would roll the news package, which would be silent B-roll, just playing as the news anchors talk about what's happening, and then they would go to what they call a sound up. And you have someone talking, or you have a siren with the police officers or an ambulance or something like that. And then it goes back to silent B-roll. Don't worry yourself by, oh, I have to shoot a whole scene. No, you don't. No, you don't. Just get little bits, little pieces, and then you can choose them. You can choose your sound ups, choose just the best ones. Don't worry about getting everything. Just get the best stuff, and then add it in some scene work. And whenever possible, when you're starting a new scene, start with the actual video sequence itself, then support it with talking head, because that will feel more narratively driven. You'll get more narrative traction, as some people might say, if you start out with your video content, then go to your talking head. When you're shooting scene work, you don't have to get everything. When you're just starting out, give yourself grace. You cannot get the beginning and the middle and the end of everything. Number one, it just doesn't happen. Number two, if you obsess over always making it happen, sometimes that can get really annoying. So just focus on getting the best moments of the scene that you either know are going to happen or you're doing your best to predict what might happen, because obviously surprises happen and no one can predict that. But there's a time when my son was having a birthday party and we were still out in Los Angeles, and he was turning 3, 4 or something like that. And I think he was turning 4. And I was expecting that I knew that everyone was going to gather around and sing happy birthday. And I wanted to make sure that I was in on his face, seeing how he was experiencing, everyone putting their attention on him, seeing his face, seeing his experience of that. But then I said, hey guys, it's LA. We do second takes of things all the time. Would you mind just singing the song again, and so I can get another take of things? And everyone laughed, and everyone went ahead and did it because everyone's used to that kind of a thing. So sometimes you can actually ask people to do things again. But man, whenever you have something that's based in getting a reaction of someone, or if there's a surprise, always focus on getting the real thing first. Get the real thing first, then shoot for coverage. That's a life lesson for field production and in pretty much any medium. Get the real thing first, then cover later. When you have that, when you get those pieces of scene work, then you can use those as your big rocks, as your anchor points for your story and your video. Then you can use your talking head to add insight instead of just tell what's happening. Now, you may actually have to still explain a little bit what's happening and, explain some of the story points. But man, if you can use talking head or even a breaking the fourth wall, talking directly to camera in the moment, if you can use that to add commentary to the story instead of just doing the boots on the ground, telling what's happening, in a perfect world, you want your scene work to be able to explain what's happening and then use your talking head or your fourth wall breaking to let people say what they think about it. These are the 5 levels of storytelling on YouTube. And if you're thinking, man, this sounds great, dude, can you just actually give some more examples here or help me apply this to my own stuff? The answer is yes, I can. The number one way to do that is for you to join us in our online community called The Green Room. The Green Room is our community here at Story Greenlight that is all about helping creators unleash new levels of impact in your storytelling, in your communication, in your content, and most of all, in yourself, as we continue growing as communicators, connecting with our audience and making content that makes a difference in people's lives. You can actually check out the Green Room for a month for free. There is a link either in the show notes or the video description, depending on where you're seeing or hearing this. So check it out there, and I would love to see you in the Green Room. Check it out for free for a month, and I'll see you there.